So the next slide is going to show you Dick Dufour, as I mentioned, who is the primary author of the Great Trails book, and he's going to give you a little intro to what he believes makes a great trails great. As we've been traveling around this year, we've been interviewing different trail managers and trail designers about what makes a great trail great. And of course, we had to start with the expert, Mr. Dick Dufour, who wrote the book, and he was our kickoff video. Hopefully we'll get that to play for you here in just a second. No.
Hello, I'm Dick Dufour. I'm here with Jeff Chain from Novak, and we are Desert Vista OHV Trail System in Cave Creek, Arizona. Beautiful spot. I've been asked, what makes a great trail great? And as you know, I've written a book called Great Trails, and we currently, Novak does seminars around the country and internationally called Great Trails Seminars. And part of that is what makes a great trail great. Usually at the beginning of that session, we ask the students for their opinion. And they'll usually say things like loops, challenge, scenic vistas, lakes, time in the saddle, long trips, no dead-end trails. Those are all good things. All those can help make a really great trail. But it goes way beyond that, and certainly one word that is used very frequently in the Great Trails book is the word wow. And what is that? Well, if you look at the vista here at Desert Vista, just being here is a wow. Just being here is exciting. It's exciting for the rider. For us, for me, being from Central Oregon, to be in this desert ecosystem, that's exciting. It's a wow because it's so different for me. And that gets to part of the wow. Different. Creative. To me, wow is a feast for the senses. And as a designer, we should be trying to make up a plate of things that the rider's eye can feast on. And those, of course, could be lakes. They could be viewpoints. They could be view sheds like this. They could be challenge features. But it goes beyond that. All those things that I just mentioned are all different. And so a key aspect of the wow factor is variety. Different changing from topography, flat land to hilly land, vegetative variety, if we can, any change from soft soil to hard soil is all variety good. Another thing is creativity. And how we put things together really affects our riding experience. And when I say earlier, feast for the senses, that's really what the rider's experience is. What is the rider seeing? What is the rider feeling? What is the rider experiencing? And how that rider experiences those things generates endorphins in the rider. And at the end of the day, those things add up to create, wow, that was a great trail. There are many things that we'll talk about in this session that go beyond just vistas and lakes. It's objects and how objects are arranged that can create physical and emotional reactions in the rider. Things like anchors and gateways and edges, all those things put together create that feast for the senses for the rider. Really cool, really fun to play with, if we have the latitude to play with things like that. A year ago, we did a workshop here in Cave Creek, and afterwards the district ranger came up to me and he said, you know what, I never expected to go to an OHV program and expect to hear about the artist's palette. And he says, that just blew me away. And he's mentioned it several times in the years since then. And that's true. There's art to trails. A photographer knows these things. The photographer frames his picture, puts the right elements in there. And that's what a great trail designer does also. with shapes and lines and colors and textures, all kinds of different things together in that perfect picture, which becomes the feast for the senses for the writer. That's the fun part of this job. We hope that you can have fun with that too.
So those of you that have met Dick Duford will not be surprised to find out that that was not scripted or prepared. That was all off the top of his head. The man has an immense amount of trail knowledge stored, and we were very lucky to get that knowledge captured in our book and transferred over to this workshop series. So when we talk about providing a quality trail experience or making a great trail great, there are some certain tools that we have that can make sure that we are successful in providing that great trail. But to do that, the tools we need to use are provide for the user's needs, design for sustainability, and develop an effective operation and maintenance program. Next slide, please. So how do we implement those tools? By using the resources and the information found in the Great Trails Guide. Next slide. When we're providing a great trail for an OHV, of course, there's some difference from the non-motorized users. The biggest being that OHV users have a motor and they have a desire to use that motor. That gives you some freedom in playing with the grade of the trail and moving the trail on your vertical alignment up and down. When people are hiking, sometimes even mountain biking, if you put a lot of ups and downs in the trail, they may not enjoy it as much. With a motor, that is a challenge feature, that is an enjoyment feature, and it adds flow to the trail. And people don't mind doing that because they get to use their machine and the motor to do that. On the flip side, with an OHV, there is more weight to the machines, which means you're putting more physical forces on the trail, which is something that you have to be aware of when you lay the trail out. Looking at your soil type and your climate to see, what do I need to factor in as I lay this trail out. Typically, when we're dealing with OHV trails, we're looking at a larger tread width or a wider tread width, which means that we're going to have more tread watershed, which is something we cover more in the workshop. But tread watershed is basically how much water and how much surface area that water covers and where does it come from. Next slide, please. This is a graphic taken from Great Trails that shows the average pressure pounds per square inch put on a user type, put on the trail by a user type. You can see that, an off-highway motorcycle, a mountain bike, car, and a horse walking are all pretty similar as far as the pounds per square inch that they put on the trail because of the way that your weight is distributed through your tire, your shoe, or the horse's hoof. ATVs have a little wider tires, so they spread out that weight better and actually put less pounds per square inch onto the trail. The difference with a motorized use is that you have rotational forces which put additional impacts on the trail, where a hiker or a horse walking are just going to be straight down forces. The mountain bikes, and then definitely more so the motorized uses, impose rotational forces onto the trail, which have to be considered when designing trails. Next slide, please. The overall theme of great trails and providing great trails and what makes a great trails great is that when you provide for the user's need, you balance that need with ensuring resource protection. So they don't outweigh each other, but you have to provide what the users want so they get what they're looking for on the trail system and don't go seek it out elsewhere. At the same time, we cannot put that need above ensuring resource protection. We are all out there to enjoy nature. We don't go out with the idea, the mindset of destroying or causing harm. We're just trying to have fun, and we need to make sure that that fun doesn't produce additional impacts on our environment. Next slide, please. What are the components in the process of putting a trail on the ground and keeping it there? In order to keep a trail on the ground, keep it fun, have sustainability, we need to have good planning. We need to use proper location and design. We just need to use the appropriate construction and implementation method. We need to have some sort of plan for maintenance, and we need to conduct maintenance. There are no trails that don't require maintenance. And we need to have management, not only management, but adaptive management, meaning that Once we get a plan for the trail, we keep evaluating that plan and make sure that it still fits and that it's still providing the optimum experience and protecting the resources. Next slide, please. When we look at all those factors that provide to make a great trail great, it's one process, not five. As we work in our groups, clubs, departments, we often have separate offices responsible for different parts of the planning and implementation process, and we get in our own little world and we tend to work separately. That cannot happen if we want to have a quality trail system. We need to put equal value on all parts of the planning process, and we need to work together collaboratively with our coworkers, with our partners, to get that great trail on the ground. When we have all of those 5 processes working together, we call this the Great Trail Continuum. Next slide, please. If we fail in any one of the components, the entire continuum could fail. They all have equal value. We're working together to make sure everything flows. If we take one part of that process out, our great trail is no longer great. Next slide. I'm going to turn this over to Jeff.
Hey everybody, it's Jeff here. And we're going to talk a little bit now about what actually makes a great trail great. And some of those things consist of, physical and emotional elements, like Dick Duford said earlier in the video, human perceptions and how they relate to those elements. And if anyone's attended any of the Great Trails workshops before, you've probably heard the wow factor used a lot. And that's what we're going to talk about first. Next slide, please. So what gives a trail a wow factor? You see in this photo here that, it's a single track trail up on a ridge top. You can see a peak in the background and mountains in the background. That's obviously a wow factor. It kind of evokes an emotional response from the rider. You can see, all these different terrain types, diversity, and that really creates an awesome experience for the rider. Next slide, please. This is another wow factor, utilizing this really cool natural arch in the rock formation. They brought the trail right through there. Obviously if you're scouting out a trail location, you see something like that, you'd probably immediately gravitate towards that. So utilizing something like that is, kind of a no-brainer sometimes, but just a really cool feature and one they utilize there. Next slide, please. And, when you're laying out a trail, you may not think of something like an old abandoned railroad. Probably not pretty common, but this is a rail to trail example. It's pretty neat. You get to actually go on this old historic railway. Another cool potential use of this would be to kind of have a historic site. You could put some interpretive signing before or after it, give the users some background. When people are out on their OHV, they want to kind of learn a lot of history in addition to seeing physical elements, and it just kind of adds to the enjoyment of the experience when you can learn about maybe something like that you're utilizing. Next slide. Another wow factor can be obviously terrain. This is in Moab. You have a real steep slick rock OHV route. Obviously you got some pucker factor there and probably an adrenaline rush for driver and passenger to be able to go up and down that. But that's obviously a huge wow factor too, is being able to utilize something like that. And it's not really a trail, but you have white dots on the sandstone, and now you have yourself a really impressive wow factor. Next slide. Here's just a kind of a cool little slot canyon. Kind of gives you a visual cue to look up. You see some trees poking out as well, but just another good example of what you can utilize, and you may not necessarily think of when you're actually out on the trail initially, but anything like that can kind of evoke those emotional responses. Next slide, please. So as we kind of talked about, trails have obviously physical, but also emotional elements. And how those physical elements are arranged can trigger an emotional response with the rider. Next slide, please. So some of the different human perceptions that you can have in your trail and physical elements include different shapes, anchors. You have trail anchors, gateways in your trail, and also edges that you can utilize. And we're going to take a look at some of those examples. Next slide. So this is just kind of, a natural shape. You see this is a compacted OHV trail that goes through a wooded area. You can see it just kind of really follows the contours of the land really nicely. Goes in between those two trees up further in the photo. It's not like, just a road that goes straight from point A to point B. They utilize the terrain really well and made it kind of a fun experience to just kind of weave in and out. And it doesn't have any, like sharp corners in it or really anything abrupt. It's just kind of a natural flowing pattern. And that's something you want to really think of when you're laying out trail. And this is a similar one here. You see it's a single track trail in a wooded area. Goes in between those two trees, has a really nice curved corner in it, super elevated corner. It just utilizes the terrain really well and doesn't do anything sharp or jagged. So anchors. Anchors are what really can not only anchor your trail to keep from, people going around something or maybe having trail degradation. They also provide, a cool physical and emotional element. You see here you have like these two big sequoia trees that they brought the trail through, and these anchor the trail in that spot as well. So it's kind of, you kill two birds with one stone with this. You get to have your trail go through these interesting features, but also keeps the trail at that location and can really help, especially if you have any like side hill trails you're working on. If you have trees or rocks on the downside, you can use those to really keep your trail anchored in that location. This is another one that, kind of triggers that wow factor, emotional response to this really neat rock overhang with, the ferns growing off the top of it, and then utilizing the trees on the lower edge of the corner and of the trail to keep it confined, but really give the rider something cool to see as well. And this would be a example of a pretty simple natural gateway. Brought this trail right through these two rock features. Once again, kind of keeps the trails and the user OHV riders contained in that area, but also gives them something cool to look at when they're traversing this particular spot. And not a natural feature, but you can also utilize if you're doing construction like bridges like this. They brought it, you see, in between these two trees, so that already is kind of giving the riders a natural break and slowing them down so you don't just abruptly come up to a bridge. Also notice how well they brought the soil in from the bridge all the way back, so you don't have any cutting underneath the bridge. That's something we'll talk about a lot when we're doing man-made features in the Great Trails workshops. Just really a well-constructed approach and exit on this bridge over a creek. And edges. This is a good example of, a lot of times you'll see trails that just kind of go straight through the middle of a meadow, kind of like a point A to point B. But why not have the trail go right along the edge of something like this aspen grove? And it follows the terrain really well, and this way you also have better drainage. It's already on, the side of the hill, so you don't just have something that's going to collect a bunch of water in the middle of it. But it also gives a really visual cue as you're coming down the trail. You see these really neat aspens, especially fall season when the leaves are changing, and just stuff like this can really trigger that wow factor in the emotional response, and it adds a lot of variety and creativity, like Dick said, to your trail when you kind of utilize all these different elements and create that feast for the senses. That's the word. And then I think Jack is going to take over and talk to you about some human feelings now.
Jack, are you on mute?
How's that? That better?
There you go.
There we go. One of the things we talk about in the Great Trails workshops and talk quite a bit in the Great Trails guidebook, we talk about human feelings and how important it is to satisfy those human feelings that the riders would have. And it's not just a matter of laying out a trail that gets you from point A to point B, but it's to provide the human feelings that they're looking for.
And we break that down into 4 major categories, one being safety, the other being efficiency, the other being playfulness, and the 4th one being harmony. And we'll talk about those a little bit more during this webinar. But when we talk about safety, we're not just talking about, okay, wearing the correct personal protective gear, like this youngster's got a helmet and shoulder pads and long pants and long shirt, those kinds of things. And that's obviously important. But when we're talking about safety, next slide, please. We're also talking about, for example, in this photograph, there's a group of people here that are out riding in a obviously out west. It's in a high desert type of environment, and they're stopped along this trail, and they definitely have a feeling of safety, that they're in a place that's safe, they're safe, they know how to get around. And when you look at this, you say, okay, well, the trail is well defined, it's cleared. You also see in the foreground that there's a marker there that provides the trail numbers. There's also an indicator below the trail numbers that indicates the level of difficulty. The other things that would contribute to the rider's feeling of safety here would be the fact that they would have been provided a map, and whether that map would be a paper map or it might be a map that would be on their phone. And the information on that map agrees with the information on this sign, so that when they are at this point, if they don't have a GPS with them, they know where they are and they know how to get to where they want to go. And that provides a feeling of safety to the rider. Next slide, please. The other thing we talk about efficiency, and one of the components of efficiency is that our trail is doing a very efficient job of providing for the rider's needs. Obviously, you want to provide an experience to the rider that they enjoy, and they're going to come back from that ride and say, wow, that was really great. And in this case, you've got a single off-highway motorcycle on a trail that's, and if you look in the background, you can see that the trail is serpentine. It's curvilinear. It has a nice flow to it. We talk about flow a lot. And the other thing you see here is that they've constructed this trail with a super elevated outside of the turn, which makes it that much more fun to ride. The rider doesn't have to do a lot of downshifting or braking at this point. It's just a fun experience. We've done a very efficient job of providing for the rider's needs. Next slide. Here's a case where the trail design was extremely efficient. It provided an enjoyable experience to the rider. But if you look at what they have done as far as this trail design and this water crossing that they have here, they have provided a hardened ramp leading up onto the surface of the bridge. They have provided the bridge with bumper guards. They have brought in some stone on the approach to the hardened area. And then what they have done, they have also provided timber on either side to restrain the rock and keep the blocks from moving. In addition to that, they've designed it in a way that those trees end up as being a gateway or an anchor, so that when the rider comes up to this, his or her eye is directed to the bridge and across the bridge. And it's a very efficient design, and it's a very durable design. Next slide. Another example of hardening. In this case, we've used a block material, geoblock. This is a climb out area coming out of an area that's wet. You will see that they have also, in addition to the block, they have utilized cut limbs. And if you'll notice the herringbone design that they've used there, that really accomplishes about 3 things, the herringbone design. The first thing is it directs the rider's eye to stay on that trail and discourage them from going off and digging it up. It also provides a method so that any rain that's coming down, or any water as a result of water runoff coming down along where that hardened trail is, it directs that water off the trail. It puts that water off into the foliage that's there. And I guess the only thing that I would say is a negative on this particular photo that's used here and we find it a lot when we're out in the field. Whenever people end up hardening a trail, the biggest mistake they make is they don't extend the hardening far enough. And if you look at the bottom of where this hardening has taken place, it should have been extended a little bit farther down into the wet area there. Next slide. We also talk about playfulness, and what we're really saying when we say playfulness, we're playing with the rider's mind, and we're trying to direct what they're looking at, and we're also trying to direct their attention to things that they will have a positive reaction to. And in this case, if you were a rider coming up this trail, the trail winds around the outcropping on the left and the boulder on the right. It directs the rider's line of sight ahead to where the large boulder is, prior to where the right turn is, where it starts to go back and into the trees. When you would ride this trail in this section, you would come away from it smiling. In other words, there's playfulness involved in it, and you have a very positive emotional reaction to that. Next slide, please. We talk a lot during the workshop about harmony. I guess another word for harmony is, we could say, how well does it fit the landscape that's out there. And if you take a look at this photo that we've got here, there is an OHV trail that works its way up around the face of the ridge that you see there, and eventually goes up and over that ridge. That trail has been laid out in a way that accomplishes a lot of things. It's got very good water control, keeping water from running down the trail. But the other thing is, when you stand back and you look at this trail, there's not a glaring scar on the landscape there. That trail has been laid in to fit that landscape. And if you spend some time looking at that picture, you probably will be able to spot about 6 or 8 motorcycles and ATVs that actually are on that trail, but you barely can see the trail. So that's what we're talking about, harmony with the landscape, that it fits the landscape, and you get good flow from it. Next slide. Again, this is a trail in northern Alabama. The trail designer here has designed it in a way that the trail flows, curvilinear layout. If you look up the trail, you can see that the trail drops down into that ravine that's there, comes back out on the other side, and then there's another climbing turn that takes you out of there. It really fits with the landscape. It gives you a nice flow. It's not creating a lot of acceleration and deceleration, braking, shifting, those kinds of things. And it's a very durable trail, as well as a very, very enjoyable trail to ride. Next slide. And one of the things that we emphasize in our workshops is that if you are a trail designer or a trail manager or a trail maintainer, you really need to get out on the trail, and you need to observe what happens on that trail over a period of time. And one of the things we stress is that the trail will tell you when it is not in harmony with nature. In other words, it's been located in the wrong place, or it hasn't been designed right for the type of use it gets. And I think when you look at this particular photo, that's a very graphic example of that. You can see that the trail ran up directly up that fall line and up that hill. And when you look at that trail is telling you it's not in the right place. It is washed out badly. It's rutted. The trail never should have gone up that way. And that's why anybody that's involved in trail, either management or trail maintenance, really needs to get out on the trail and observe what's happening in different locations constantly, that you're always evaluating what is happening there, and then you ask questions. Why do we have a problem here? How do we solve it? And then by means of adaptive management, you then take care of the problem. Next slide. Another graphic example of the trail telling you it was in the wrong place to begin with. If you look at the person that's standing up there at the top of that trail, the elevation of that trail originally is where their arm is out on that embankment. And over time, this trail has collected so much water and provided such a conduit for water running off down this trail that essentially has removed all the soil from this trail. And obviously, the trail was located in the wrong place, and or the proper steps were not taken to keep the water off that trail before it ever got on the trail up there at the top of the trail. Next slide. Mark, I think you're up again.
Yeah, we're kind of back to trails are an art form, and great trails utilize the artist palette. When we talk about the artist palette in trails, we're talking about using different factors that affect people's senses. And those could include line, color, texture, shape, form, contrast, and depth. So looking at, line, using natural objects in the world to direct the rider's eye, seeking out different colors, going towards a neat patch of wildflowers. Texture, if you look at this picture to the right, that trail in Flagstaff, Arizona, goes right along the base of this rock, and you have all these little holes in the side, and it's very cool texture, very appealing to the eye. And then you go around the corner, and it actually goes right into a gateway up over a nice little roll in the hill. Very good design, very good control of the trail, very good use of what was out there. Excellent example of using these different tools on the palette to create a great trail experience. Next slide, please. Trails are an art form, and great trails stimulate our senses. We can use touch, taste, sight, hearing, and smell when we're out in the trail. Things that people can touch. We don't want people licking our trail, of course, to get that taste, but through the smell and the natural experience, like fresh sagebrush, fresh huckleberries alongside the trail, provide that taste and that smell that invoke memories and provide a lasting experience. Hearing unique things, animals, different, being along water, hearing the creek flow. Those are all things that are in our palette and provide stimulation for our senses. The higher and more varied the stimulation, the greater experience. You can see to the right here a trail in Montana where they have actually gone underneath the freeway. That trail goes directly under I-90. It is approved by the Department of Transportation, and it's a unique trail feature. Very cool thing to do, very unique experience, very popular with the local users. However, it is not as exciting on a dirt bike without a headlight as it is when a side-by-side ATV or dirt bike with a headlight. It gets a little exciting there in the middle, but it is a good, unique experience, something I haven't forgot because I rode blind for about 50 feet. So that concludes our presentation tonight from Great Trails and providing what makes a great trail great. At this time, we would like to open up to questions, but before we do that, we just want to say that we hope that this has provided a nice introduction to great trails. We'll get you interested in going to www.novac.org to look for more information about the Great Trails book if you haven't seen it, and to hopefully seek out an opportunity to participate in a Great Trails workshop. Any contact info, any questions you have on this can be found at novac.org, and we will be ready and available to help you with that. So with that, we'd like to open it up to questions. Any questions you guys have on the presentation tonight?
Hey, Mark, this is Dwayne here. Good job, guys. As we wait, we'll talk here for a couple more minutes, and if anybody on the webinar has a question, please type it into the chat feature, and we'll get it answered. But one question I have, Mark, that maybe you could answer is, we saw a lot of really, really cool wow factors: the natural bridge, the rail trail, the going up on a ridge and having the great view shed. those aren't always available everywhere we can put a trail. What do you have any examples of smaller wow factors or things that you people might not think are a wow factor, but they are to riders maybe from a different area, something like that?
Yeah, absolutely. There's not always going to be those big views and those outstanding rocks, or character trees. Sometimes a small root rod is enough, or a different color of wildflower is enough to provide a little wow and something that people remember at the end of the day. Um, Another thing is that you can create the wow. There's examples of parks across the country who have manufactured challenge features when they didn't have them. Uh, my friend in Hood River put together a firewood pit where you actually ride through a bunch of split logs to create challenge in an area that didn't have them. And he also put in a balance beam in that same area so riders have a chance to just ride across a log and see if they can stay up on top of it with their motorcycle. Not complicated, not heavy labor intensive to create, but it provided a little bit of wow in the area where they were lacking. Just creativity and a little bit of working with what you have.
Mark, we have another question from Joe. In a situation like the exposed rock section slide number 35, where would you begin to repair a trail that has been worn down that much? And I think Laura has the slide in question up.
Okay. So to start with, I wouldn't repair this section of trail. I would rehab it. Ultimately, the best decision would be to reroute that trail and then close the existing trail so that you're not continuing to degrade the resources. Using that trail, wrapping around the hillside instead of going straight up and down the fall line, it's going to provide a lot better results. That you can rip that trail, seed it, and provide, maybe even install some check dams or some different drain line ditches to get the water off there. But if that's not available, that's not always something that people are allowed to do because of environmental clearances or archaeological clearances or things like that may keep the trail exactly where it's at. Then you start looking at hardening that tread, bringing in some rock to provide a hardened, looking at base course and lining that whole section, which is going to be very labor intensive, very expensive, but it's the best chance you have. With that, you're also going to want to add in some drain dips or rideable dips so that you're able to get the water off the trail. And those will also need to be hardened with that rock to keep them in place. Otherwise, they will break down fairly quickly.
Mark, we have another question. This one's from JC. And first, he congratulates you guys on the great job you did. And then he says, have you considered doing a trail maintenance workshop?
Is this one me still?
Yeah, Mark, I was just going to say we covered it a lot in the Great Trails Workshop itself, but you can expound how you like.
Yeah, that is the topic.
Everyone could go on mute. Thank you. Sorry, go ahead.
That is some of those topics we're able to cover in Great Trails Workshop, as far as maintaining the trail and what you can do.
Or could everyone please make sure they're on mute? Thank you.
Yeah, so we cover a lot more in depth during the actual trail workshop. And we've actually considered and discussed getting more of the information from the book into people's hands in sort of a field manual, something that isn't 350 pages to carry around, and that may be a little smaller, a little more compact, a little lighter, and provide you with some tips and tricks there for providing maintenance. The key thing with maintenance is that there is there's no real magic tricks as far as maintaining the trail. You need some good operators with machinery, and you need people willing to go out and keep drainage open and functional with Pulaski's, McLeod, shovels, whatever's on hand. But yes, that is something we do cover more in depth, and we're looking to expand upon even further.
Thank you, Mark. Next question is from Carrie, and it says, in the past, we have used lock block on some of our trails. Now we are hearing from a lot of the motorcycle riders that they are causing the trails to be more dangerous when they get rained on and become slick. Are you hearing of this problem? And if so, what can be done about it?
Jeff, you want to kick that one off?
Sure. We've seen this before. Like, we did a workshop in Oregon this year where they had some geotextile on a really long downhill section that basically did a sharp 90 degree at the bottom of it. And not surprisingly, riders were sliding off the edge of that. And really, I think, one of the things we recommended there was if they can reroute that section of trail, then that's probably going to be the best option, because getting rid of the geoblock or the textile or the lock block's not going to really solve your issue. You're still going to have a big rut. So you're probably looking at rerouting it as being your best option there. What do you think, Mark?
Yeah, if you're using any sort of geoblock, geotextile, those are never meant to make contact with tires. They're not built to withstand those forces. So they have to maintain cover. If you're trying to use them on too steep of a incline, they're not going to maintain that ground cover. They're going to get impacted and they're miserable to ride on. So, making sure that you're using the tools correctly and providing the correct implementation is going to be a big money saver and a big experience saver for the riders. If you're using paver blocks, which I despise paver blocks. They're labor intensive, they get expensive, and they seldomly are installed right. But if you are going to use them, they need to be confined. We showed some pictures where paver blocks were confined by some 4x4s that kept those in place, kept them from rolling around, kept them from moving. And then we saw the herringbone pattern that kept people from going around those pavers, which is typically the problem you run into as a manager, is that people don't want to ride around them, so they will go to the side. So you have to keep those from moving, and you have to be able to keep people on them. For the rider experience, it's much better to use rock where you can, starting with a base course, maybe putting something a little less big and bulky and sharp towards the top, but that provides a much better experience. But again, anytime we harden the trail, we're probably in a spot that the trail shouldn't be at, and we should look at relocating the trail if possible, and save ourselves time, money, and back.
Thanks, guys. Next question is from Rocky and Pearl, and it is, what good information do you have for use for using to manage a new off-road park?
Jack?
Again, I think that if you're saying, is it a new OHV park, then it's extremely important that you lay out the trails and the riding opportunities there with sustainability and durability in mind. In other words, don't necessarily, because you've got a piece of property and you either have a game trail that goes up straight up a fall line, or if you have an old logging road or something like that, you really need to take a hard look at whether or not that automatically becomes part of your trail system. The other thing I think that's extremely important, especially for opening up a new OHV park, is you have to do an awful lot of education, and that education can take the form of signage, it can take the form of handouts, it can take the form of on a website, so that people that come there understand what the rules are and how they're expected to behave, because if you don't do that right up front, in the long run, you're going to have a lot of problems. I don't know if that, we could probably do a 1 hour webinar just on that subject, but I think those are just some of the high points of it. And the other thing is you've got to actively manage it. You don't want a situation where you basically say, okay, we've opened the gates, come on in and ride and do whatever you want. That's a disaster in the making.
Sorry?
I don't know if that answers the question, but.
No, I think that's great, Jack. And I think one of the key points Jack hit on is that, you set it up right from the beginning. You don't let your buddy with the Bobcat go out and just plow through the middle of your land. You go out and you design and you plan and you create experiences that are fun and sustainable from the get-go. We do have several resources at Novak that deal directly with OHV parks. We have a book by Tom Crimmins and we have a book by George Fogg. One of them is $10 and the other is $30. That's just beyond our control. It's one of the few resources that we do charge for, but they're both really good resources. And of course, the Great Trails Guide is always something that we recommend to help with that.
Excellent. Thank you, guys. Looks like we've reached the end of the questions. Certainly hope that this was informative. Want to strongly stress that Novak staff, our partners, and our board of directors are always willing to help. If you're unfamiliar with the Novak family, please come to our website, check it out. The email address you can contact us at is on the screen, trailhead@novak.org. Like I mentioned at the outset, we're going to try to do one of these webinars every month. If we're doing a topic that interests you, please jump on. If you miss a month, you can access the recorded versions. Mark alluded to the fact that we have lots of tools about parks and great trails and adventure trail and getting kids involved and safety resources and lots of ways to help, and we're anxious to do it. Please do not hesitate to reach out to us. Anything we can do, we will do to help. Should also mention we have something newer, is our issue area representatives. And what that is we have 4 issue areas: public lands, private lands, youth and education, and I'm missing one. But effectively, if you need some help on any issue, we have an expert that we can pair you with that's on our board of directors, who can then reach out to the appropriate partners who have experience in whatever issue you're dealing with, and we'll form an ad hoc committee and work with you directly to help you improve your OHV riding experience. Again, you can start that process simply by emailing trailhead@novak.org. If you're interested in seeing the full Great Trails workshop or bringing one to your area, again, you can let us know. Mark, Jeff, and Jack have a tremendous amount of experience in not only facilitating these workshops, providing the information, but also helping provide ideas on how to get funding for the workshop. And I highly recommend it. I've had the great opportunity to be involved in several. I've learned something every time. They do a great job of tailoring the workshop to the situation you have on the ground. I've been to one in Oregon and Colorado and Vermont, and certainly seen some different terrains, and the principles all apply. It's just a little bit of the things you're looking for that are different, but these guys have seen it all. So with that, I guess we can conclude, and I just want to, again, thank everyone, and please do not hesitate to reach out to anybody on Novak staff. Reach out to us through the trailhead@novak.org email and let us know how we can help. Thank you very much.